Are we all set to go?
My lord, yes. You may recall overnight some further documents were produced by my learned friend. Those are referred to but not exhibited to expert reports. We've got no objection to them going in. I don't know what mechanics are proposed for introducing them. You may already have them, my lord, I don't know.
No.
I see.
Or at least not that I'm conscious of.
My own friend's on mute.
It may be easiest that when I get to the documents, we'll screen share them, and then we can give them an agreed exhibit number and make sure you get hard and soft copies with the numbers.
Okay. Well, let's see where we get to. All right. Are you ready to continue, Mr. Williamson?
Yes, my lord.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williamson. Just hopefully a few topics to consider today, and hopefully it won't take too much more of your time. I just want to talk to you about cost for the projects briefly. Yeah. Now, as I understand it, you have taken your costings from a report that's produced periodically by RLB International, yes?
That's correct, yeah.
And they're cost consultants, aren't they?
Cost consultants, project managers, yes.
Yes, and that is a free publication, isn't it?
Correct.
And would you say that it is a publication that they produce for a number of reasons, but primarily, I suppose, from their perspective, for business development purposes?
Yeah, but it is empirical evidence. It is based on their experience of various different markets, different use classes, different specifications. There is another company, actually, ACOM, do a similar, what they call the handbook. So it's a document that is used by the property industry widely.
Yes, and what it does, it provides range, can I put it like this, a range of costings per square foot for different types of development in various different countries.
Yeah, absolutely, but it goes further than that. It also provides a range for different use classes as well, so you can drill down a bit further.
Well, I'm looking at the one that's going to be introduced a little bit later for 2018. Mm-hmm. So for example, we don't have it yet, but you're familiar with it, aren't you?
Mr. Montague-Smith, if it's helpful, we can screen share it if there's a particular page that you want the witness to see.
That's very kind. I wasn't proposing to show it, but why not? If it's easy to do, why not show? I think it's you've produced, I think, the 2018 version. My own friend has. So if we could turn to the actual page for the Middle East, which is page 15, we'll see what we've got.
Yeah, I think we produced the 2013 and the 2018.
Ah, maybe I've only received the 2000. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think they're in the appendices.
I see. So if we just zoom in on the bottom of that, this is the page that you're working from for your costing, yes?
That isn't my exhibit. I just showed the tables, but yeah, that is a table.
Is that the table that you're working from, though? This is the 2018 RLB International report, so presumably this is the page.
Right. I'm assuming so. The one in my report, I'm assuming is the same. I took an extract. This is the whole page. This is not my exhibit. So, provided they're the same, yeah.
Well, I thought that was the purpose for which they were being produced, but maybe my learned friend can tell me otherwise. I don't know.
I can tell you this, that in his appendix, he had the web link to the entire report, and then he had reproduced the page. So you've got the document that he gave you the web link to. Whether you've taken him to the right table or not is up to you, not me. I assume you have, but maybe the easiest thing for you to do is to go to the appendix of his report and compare them, just so he's confident.
I think there's a web link, though, isn't there, in that rather than the actual report? That's the problem. I mean, you tell me, Mr. Williamson. I'd assumed that you knew what this was. This is you can see it from the bottom, the RLB International report, second quarter of 2018. This appears to be the report that's being referred to. And if we scroll up on the page, we can see this is the page for the Middle East.
Sure. My point is I haven't memorised it, but it looks very familiar.
I see. So, all right. But you've produced estimates that are based on something like this, at least.
No, I produced them on the RLB report, absolutely, 2013 and 2018.
Yeah, all right. And then, sorry, if we could scroll down again, we can see what the information is that we can identify from this report. So you've got various provisions for the Middle East, and then you can see the areas, locations are Abu Dhabi, Doha, Dubai, Riyadh. So you've selected, presumably, the Dubai line, read across from there, and found
Yes.
what the rough construction costs per square metre. Is that right?
Correct. They're either per square metre or per square foot. To be honest, I can't remember. They look like per square metre, probably per square foot at this rate, but yes.
Probably not 5,800 per square foot, is it? For example, for office buildings, that would be quite a lot.
No. Yes, agreed.
So all right, and all right, thank you. So and then you've said, well, it's going to be a high grade office, so we'll take the high version of premium offices, would you, at 7,000? So that's the sort of thing that you've done, is it?
Absolutely.
All right.
It was slightly different because retail is not exact in terms that they don't do what we describe as the ancillary retail. So we took a midpoint from that part of the index.
Yes, I see. So you're not a quantity surveyor yourself, are you?
No, I'm not.
No, I see. So you've not applied any kind of independent assessment of your own to these figures?
Well, these figures are independent, so I don't believe I need to. But I have no. You're absolutely right. I haven't stress tested them beyond the figures in front of me.
Yes, and would you accept then that using this sort of methodology for quantifying the likely cost of a project is a pretty rough and ready way of going about it?
No, not necessarily. I think you need to look at the development life cycle. At the moment, we are costing as JLL do. They call it their high-level cost report. These are potentially high-level costings at the moment. Until you get down to a design level, you can't come up with an exact number, and we're not at that stage yet. So these provide a very good benchmark as to what the cost of the project might be. But through the process, you will drill down and get more accurate figures relative to the specification and a bill of quantities. Yes,
quite, of course, and then the bill of quantities goes out for tender, and that's the point at which you find out what your costs actually are going to be.
After negotiation of that tender price, yes.
Yes, and so, but there's you mentioned the JLL high-level costings, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But doing a sort of price per square meter approach is if I can put it like this, even higher level than what the JLL have done. Would you accept that?
I didn't see any reference to where JLL's figures had come from, other than from experience. I think it was. There wasn't a benchmark to any particular project.
Yes, right. But similarly, I mean, there's no reference in this report to where these figures have come from, other than experience. Yes.
Well, RLB produced these reports. As I said, this is empirical. So this has come from, I don't know how many schemes, but multiple schemes that they've been involved with, and probably even others. And this is a sort of an amalgamation of those numbers. You say it was a marketing document. You're probably right. But if they were to issue to the market invalid data, then it would be pretty bad marketing.
Right. Okay. But well, let's look at the JLL approach, which is at bundle E, tab 7, page 386. Thank you, operator. Not sure who that was.
So I'm on E 386. Yes.
Yes, you got that. So that's the JLL high-level costing. And you understand
Yes.
what the brand has done. I think he explains it, but he's gone to the internal JLL project and development services team to obtain costings from the team.
Sure, yeah.
And you would agree, wouldn't you, that the JLL project and development services team is going to be a competent set of people to produce a costing of this sort?
Yes.
Right. And you see what they have done. If you go through, you see the summary, in fact, and a comparison on page 388, but the costings themselves start on page 390. And it's obviously not as detailed as a bill of quantities, but it is a more detailed approach to the costing than simply taking a price per square metre, isn't it? Just sticking with the detail first.
Yeah, I would be interested to understand. My understanding from the reading of this previously was that they'd looked at some kind of design of a hexagonal building, because there's a lot of reference to a hexagonal building, and I think a lot of these numbers are based on that. I think the point certainly for the court is we're actually in a position where we don't know the design. So I accept, as per the JLL numbers, that that they're probably very accurate, but we don't have a design yet.
Well, I think the question of the design and the hexagonal nature of the building was only relevant to the question of efficiency, which we discussed yesterday. Yes? So there's that discrete issue of efficiency.
So my point was that I don't know what they based these on necessarily in terms of pure design.
Yes.
Obviously, they have a table later on which gives a bit more detail. But anyway, sorry.
Well, I assume that they've done. I think that what they've done is take a similar approach to you, which is assume a generic, no particular design, and obviously, therefore, it is to that extent uncertain. But they've tried to adopt a slightly more detailed approach than simply taking a price per square metre. Would you accept that that's probably right?
Oh, it sounds probably right, yes.
Now, one of the things that in fact, the thing that you say about this approach in your report is that it is not an independent costing analysis, yes?
Correct.
And I think what you mean by that is that it is not independent of Mr. Brand.
Well, it's the same firm that he works for.
Yes, but I mean, for example, you're not saying that the costing is not independent of the parties, are you?
I'm sorry, I'm not following your line of thought. JLL has produced this for Simon Brand, who is a director in JLL. So from an independence point of view, he's appointed his own company. I'm not suggesting the numbers are wrong. What I'm suggesting is I would take an independent approach. And in fact, if you look at my own report, I could have gone to the Deloitte in-house costing team and done the same. I chose not to. I chose to take an independent approach. Now, I'm also not suggesting the numbers are wrong, but if you look at the comparison on a like-for-like basis, and it's got to be like-for-like, in the approved scheme, whilst Mr. Brand does say his numbers are lower, if you compare like-for-like with the car parking allocation, they're actually higher by 3%. If you look at the HBU scheme, his development is 26% higher. Now, I'm not suggesting they're wrong. What I'm suggesting is an independent approach ought to be taken in a scenario such as this.
But both you and Mr. Brand are acting independently of the parties to this proceedings. That's my point, yes?
Absolutely, but I haven't appointed Deloitte to do my work.
Yes, but if you did, Deloitte would be independent of the party acting in the proceedings, yes?
Well, I think there's a link. I think there's a link, but I'll leave that. Sorry, I'll leave that.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt all of this, but I'm surely independence is now a question for you rather than anybody else. With that,
I'm just trying to understand the witness's complaint about this report. Is the one thing that he says about negative against this aspect of the report. We can make submissions on it, but thank you for your interjection, Mr. Sprange. It's always welcome. All right.
It's an observation. It's not a criticism.
I see. All right. And I think you say you don't yourself really take a view on any of the particular costs that are set out in that report. You don't say they're right.
I don't. Yeah, exactly. I don't know the detail behind them.
Right. Let me ask you about one or two other minor details on the costings. Firstly, about the parking. Can I ask you to turn to your report, please? Page 17.
Page 17. What is that reference?
E17?
Sorry, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Now, just looking at figure F11, sorry, figure 11. Do you have that?
Yes. Yes.
Now, do you see there, if you look at, it says retail offices and then under that parking.
Correct.
And do you see you've provided 4 floors of parking?
4 basement levels, yes.
And 2,645 spaces. And then you've given an area square foot for the parking. Do you see that?
Area, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
all right.
that's the right.
Now, you may need a calculator for this, but if you divide 996,468 by 4,
Oh, calculator's not working. Yes.
do you see that you get 249,117 square feet?
Yes.
So each of the parking floors would need to be that big.
Yes. Potentially, yes.
And if you turn back to page E14 and look at paragraph 3.2.
Sorry, where am I going? Sorry.
Page E14 of your report, paragraph 3.2.
Yeah.
Do you see the total size of the site?
Yeah.
Is only 226,989.
Yeah.
So have you calculated parking by reference to a parking bay floor that would have to be larger than the site?
So no, this is again, it goes back to design. You know, and I appreciate in the DIFC you are not allowed to use ground floor as car parking generally, but probably 50 to 60% of the buildings have ground floor parking, all on exceptional basis. Currency House does, the precinct does, the village does, Central Park Towers does. So this is a design matter. I get your point. Absolutely, I get your point. But it's a design matter. I've allowed for car parking on a per square foot basis, which is relevant for the model at this stage.
But if you're going to have subterranean parking, as you have anticipated, aren't you going to need a 5th floor?
Potentially, but until I've done the design, I don't know.
All right.
And you know, this is the whole point in terms of the life cycle of development. Until you get to that stage, you can't be that accurate. And if you look at the difference between the site area, which you took me to, I can't remember the next.
The site area or the floor size? The site area is on page E14.
Yeah. So if you take the difference of the calculation, I think a quarter of a million, it's about 25,000 square feet. The 25,000 square feet is the overage on one floor. It's a mathematical calculation, but I absolutely get your point. I absolutely get your point. But what I would say, this is a design issue.
Well, you're going to have to find 100,000 square feet of parking, aren't you, on this basis, if you've only got 4 floors?
Yeah. And I would, as I say, this is a design matter. I've allowed for car parking space at that volume on a rate per square metre. That's all. That's all you can do at this stage.
Now, is it right that in your report you have not provided for parking for service departments?
Can we just go to the part of my report where that is, and I'll explain what I've done.
Will you tell me which part you want to look at, and we'll go to it.
Well, you've asked me the question. So where is the schedule? I'm sorry. Where's the schedule?
It's your report. You want to show me part of your report. Tell me which part you want to show me. Take your time if you'd like to take through it.
It's the HBU. Okay. So if you go to E34.
Yeah.
And what you have, and I don't know whether you've seen the model, which was actually the access model which drove these figures. What you have in case of the residential, we have a makeup of different unit types. So studio, 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed. Up until the 3 bed, each unit would command 1 car parking space, and then a 3 bed would command 2. So you can do the calculation on that against the keys. It's actually units, and that's how you derive that number. The same applies for the hotel, but the hotel, the ratio you take for hotels as per the municipality is you take 0.2 of a space for the keys, and so I've applied that. If you then take that number, so if you take 265 times 0.2 gives you 53 spaces. As you can see, what I've done is I've allowed on the hotel, I've allowed 137. So it's actually an amalgamation of the two. So the service department car parking is actually shown, and apologies, it's not that clear, but the service department allocation is within the hotel. Now, the difference, and Mr. Brand has a higher allocation of car parking. He also has a much higher allocation for the residential, which suggests, and I haven't seen his breakdown of residential apartments, which suggests he maybe has more 3 bed. So that could be a reason for the difference. But what you have is the allocation in the hotel for both the service departments and the hotel. Again, with Mr. Brand, what he's done is he's assumed that each service department has 1 car parking space per apartment. What I've done is I've assumed that the service departments sit within the inventory of the hotel, and so they're under the umbrella of hotel use. And that's how I've got to my numbers. You know, I'm slightly higher, 8 spaces, I believe, on offices. I'm the same on retail, but that shows you where the differential is.
Yeah. So just looking at those numbers, you're saying that actually under the row for the hotel, where it says 265 units and then spaces, the spaces should be 53. I think that was your number, yes? And then the 80, that leaves 84, as far as my numbering is, that leaves 84 left over from the 137. Is that your point?
Well, I've done the calculation the other way. If you took 265 and added 241 to it and then divided by 0.2, you would need 101.2 spaces. So again, my calculation is slightly over. I think that the point for the court to understand is the approach is different. Mr. Brand has assumed a different mix of residential units, and he's assumed a different ratio. And it probably also goes down to his approach to selling the service departments. I don't know, but that's why there is a difference.
But do you not accept that whether they're part of the hotel's inventory or whether they're going to be sold into the market, the requirement is that each hotel apartment requires a parking spot?
It all depends on, and again, it's a municipality requirement, whether you have, it depends on the sizes. And I think if you go to the JLL report, it's very clear as to the requirements. And I can't remember what page that is.
So E397, E396, E397, so parking requirements.
E3. Yeah, absolutely. That's the explanation, as well as the both the E396, 397. So that's where Mr. Brand, and that's why Mr. Brand's figures are much higher. Again, it is partly down to a design issue, but I've explained how I've assessed mine.
Yeah, but if we look on page E397, do you see the second last bullet point there? 1 number parking space for each hotel apartment. So whether these service departments sit within the hotel's inventory, or whether they're sold out into the market, they're going to need a parking spot. But you've only given them 0.2 of a parking spot. Is that right?
Well, you've got to understand the use class, right? These are hospitality, in my report, these are hospitality style units. They are hotel inventory. It's a very, very different distinction between apartments that people live in, as opposed to service apartments where you have a transitory user. So I haven't, quite simply, there is a difference, and I've explained my difference. I have not allowed one space. I've allowed 20% of that space, and that's why there is a difference. Okay,
well, let's assume that the service department sits within the hotel's inventory, so it's a hotel room of some sort.
Yeah.
Where in section 242 of this report, which bullet point do you therefore say it is?
Well, I don't. I've told you my assessment. This is Jones Lang's approach. Again, it's a design issue. I can't say any more at this stage. We're at a very early stage well, we're not even at a stage of design. So if the scheme was slightly different, and as per the municipality guidelines, we required more car parking spaces, then more would be built. I think we also need to look at this on another basis as well. With a mixed use class building, very often spaces are sort of shared at different times of the day. And I appreciate there's not a massive retail component, but retail will be frequented at certain times, offices frequented at different times. And the managing agents basically shift that allocation across the day. Maybe not a great example, but I go back to my point. It's really about design.
But what we're trying to do at this stage is estimate how many parking spaces would be required for the development that you have anticipated. And you've taken a particular approach. And what I'm suggesting is that what you really ought to have done is provide for one parking space, according to the municipality regulations, provided for one parking space for each of these service apartments. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I think it goes to the definition. As I've said, the serviced apartments, in my definition currently, are under the hotel inventory. Look, if we can agree to disagree, if it transpires that my definition is, my definition is right at the moment. If it transpired through the design process that these became serviced apartments that required the ratio of 1-to-1, then it would have to change, and absolutely the cost would go up.
Can we look very briefly as well at your provision for residential parking? So you've provided for 641 units, and you've provided very slightly more than one space per unit. Yes.
Yeah.
And if you look at the gross floor area there, you're looking at units that are going to be on average. Well, I don't actually have the average, I'm afraid, but getting close to 2,000 square feet per unit.
What page was that again, please?
We're on E34. We're still
yeah, I've got to go keep my finger in the right page. So the mix, and from memory, the mix was the units are all allocated one space, bar 33 units which were allocated 2 spaces. That's from memory, and that was the model that was within access. So in terms of trying to then deduct an average area, yes, it's a mathematical calculation. But you've got to understand that at the bottom end you're going to have studios, and the studios could be 50 square meters, whereas the 3-bed will be much larger. So again, it's down to design.
Yes, but all I'm saying is that it looks like for any flats over 1,600 square feet, they need to have 2 parking spaces. So if you are estimating parking required for 641 units, which look like broadly on average a little bit under 2,000 square feet, isn't it likely to be more prudent to estimate 1.5 parking spaces per unit?
I've got to go back. I'm sorry, it's a design matter. Until I've got the design, I can't say it. Sorry.
And then the final thing is this, that you have adopted in your costings a contingency of 5%, haven't you?
I have.
Would you accept that on the majority of construction projects in Dubai, the contingency which is in fact adopted is more like 10%?
I wasn't aware there was a standard.
From your experience, would you accept?
Well, the way you apply contingency is by understanding how far. Where contingency goes wrong is basically variation, mainly. Clients are varying the original design, and then costs change and whatever. So I've made the assumption, you could have no contingency. That'd be very foolish. There isn't a standard for contingency.
Would you accept that most construction projects in Dubai provide a 10% contingency?
No.
I see.
I don't know. I don't have that evidence. You'd have to go through multiple documentation, which is not made publicly available.
So you don't know? Is that your evidence?
I've been involved with plenty of projects where contingencies have ranged from 5 to 10 to 15 to, in some cases, just a fixed contract. There isn't a standard.
Have you ever seen one with less than 5%?
No, I haven't. No.
I see. So have you taken a contingency right at the bottom of the scale of what you've seen in your experience?
Again, it goes back to the nature of the contract. Is it fixed price? How far are you with the design? Is the, as I said, the biggest issue you've got to avoid to account for contingency is variation. And if you have a well-designed building and the client has been informed all the way through the design process and is not going to interfere again, then that contingency should be more than enough. But again, you've got to look at it on individual merit, and I've made that assumption. If that wasn't the case, then the contingency should increase.
My Lord, Mr. Williamson, thank you for your patience with my lengthy questioning. I appreciate it. My Lord, those are all my questions.
Thank you. Re-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Williamson, I'm just going to have the RLB document put back up for you. And I'm going to ask you to see page 2 of that document. During the course of your evidence, you used the phrase empirical data. If we could have the whole page on screen, please. And could you please explain to the court, to the best of your knowledge, how RLB source the data that they include in their reports, and in giving your answer, if relevant, tell us what these various things mean on the page, particularly the boxes below.
Yeah, so RLB are in the market. This is what they do for a living. They are cost consultants, project managers. So their day-to-day life is acting on behalf of clients, issuing tender documentation against specification, bills of quantities, negotiating with contractors to arrive at actual build costs for particular different projects. They then take that data, consolidate it by use class, by region, by specification, and then they play that back through this report. It is empirical. This has come from the market. As I said, AECOM do a very similar thing, and I would say a very, very high percentage of property industry professionals look at this sort of data at this stage of design, where there's limited design. So a lot of people say, for want of a better word, these are the Bibles of construction costs.
Okay. Now, can you tell from the JLL high cost analysis that's being done and that's appended to Mr. Brand's report, whether they have taken into consideration the kind of data we see in those 6 boxes on this page?
Having read the document, I couldn't see any reference. I think it referred to their experience of projects or whatever. So the answer is no.
Okay. You gave some evidence about like for like comparisons between the numbers that you obtain from this, as with the JAL numbers. Can you explain the significance of that like-to-like comparison, both in percentage terms and with respect to the substance of this debate between you and Mr. Brand?
Sure. So in the approved scheme 2013, what I adopted was a higher car parking ratio than the municipality requirement, basically to make the scheme more marketable. Car parking is inadequate in my opinion. Well, it's proven as well, inadequate. And the likes of ICD Brookfield have done the same in their own building to make it more marketable. And you have to understand that car parking is a limited resource across the DIFC generally, and the population are still car bound. So what I did was assume a ratio, and from memory it was 38.5 square meters per space, less so for the retail. The retail is only ancillary. And what that did was produce an area that was bigger than the municipality minimum requirement. So I provide more spaces than the municipality says is a minimum. What Mr. Brand did was apply the minimum, which is perfectly understandable, but actually that would make the building less marketable. He said in his report that his costs were below my costs. But if you then apply the like for like, and I take his assumption of car parking, his costs are actually 3% higher. On the HBU, again, there's a table that shows the comparison of the bill costs applied, and Mr. Brand is lower in certain cases, and he's higher in others. It appears that he's actually higher generally on the use classes that have the bigger volume, so the residential, the service apartments, and the hotel. That's just an observation. But what that does is means that his bill cost for the HBU, I think, is about 26% higher than the RLB rates.
Is there any data, material, or information contained in the annex that he relies upon that can help you understand or explain to the court why there is that 26% difference?
There is, as far as I can see, there was no detail around it. There's reference to it. Yeah, I'll say.
All right. And the word hindsight and the principle of hindsight came up a great deal during your examination. Is there any industry guidance as to whether you should or should not apply hindsight to these types of valuations?
Yeah, well, Mr. Brand is a chartered surveyor. He's a fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, same body that I'm a member of. There is a guidance note within the Red Book which says you should not, and I think I put it in my supplemental report, which says you should not use hindsight if you're instructed to do evaluation at a date in the past.
I'm going to
sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to put up page 19 of the general standards in the Red Book, and I just want you to look at subparagraph H and tell me. So it starts at the bottom of page 19 and finishes at the top of page 20. So you'll just read both.
Do you want me to read it?
Yes. I mean, just I'm going to ask you whether this was the guidance that you were referring to or not.
Yes.
My lord, my learned friend appears to be embarking on his examination in chief in response. I mean, at the moment it doesn't matter, but if it goes where I suspect it might end up going, it will become a problem. So I just get my objection in now.
Mr. Williamson, that sentence, not with the benefit of hindsight at some later date, what's the rationale behind that guidance?
Well, surveyors are very often are from time to time asked to do historic valuations, and what they're expected to do is transpose themselves back in time assuming they're at that point in time, and then they don't know what has happened in the future. Because if that particular asset was valued at that date, which is the requirement, i.e. valuing at a point in the past, they wouldn't know what had happened in the future. So equally, actually, what it means is that they can't even factor in booms. So if the market had improved, you still can't factor that in. The RSS does say you might want to consider trends, but that's just that, that's almost to sort of reinstate the numbers. But if I'm in 2013, I have no idea what is happening in 2022 or 23. So I think you're on mute.
Is a global pandemic such as COVID a trend?
No. Nor is the global financial crisis.
Right, thank you. Now, you were also asked a number of questions about your approach with respect to hotels. My first question is why did you choose the sample that you chose? And
what did I choose? Sorry, the competitive set?
Yes, exactly. The comparisons. Yeah. And if by way of reminder, it's paragraph 5.47 of your first report.
Paragraph 5.47. So we're going to that. So I think you need to understand that Dubai has actually has micro markets. So if I was to go to the hospitality market in particular, somewhere like Jumeirah Palm is an absolute micro market. So whilst the Dubai market is operating as a whole and performing, if you looked at it on a consolidated basis, at an IRR of X and an occupancy of Y, certain markets perform either better or worse than that. And as I said, the Palm Jumeirah is a great example of where ADRs and occupancies are extremely high. The same applies here in relation to the DIFC. And so I've taken my competitive set, and as you can see, the competitive set is Jumeirah Estates Towers. So that's the two-story development, literally, 300 meters from the gate. The Fairmont Dubai, which is relatively close on Sheikh Zayed Road. The Address Dubai, which is to the west. The Ritz, which is actually in the DIFC, and the Sofitel, which is very similar to the address location. The fact is there aren't that many hotels in the DIFC, so I've taken the most relevant and ones that are similar to what I believe would be within the which make up the competitive set.
Mm-hmm. All right. Conversely, Mr. Brand has used a competitive set, and if you want to take up its E561, it's Appendix Q to his report. E561. No, if you can take that up. I don't know whether you've studied this before, but I see.
Can I just say one thing? Sorry, that isn't a competitive set. That's a list of a lot of hotels. Pardon?
Okay, understood. Why? Yeah. Why do you say that it's not a competitive set and it's just a list of hotels?
Well, it's taking Dubai-wide hotels from a very wide range geographically, in terms of profile of the hotels, the target audience, probably their ADR ratings are very different. But I think I put it in my report. It's a very broad brush approach. I am surprised that you would not. Well, most professionals within the hospitality valuation industry, that high percentage would pull together a competitive set.
Now, in terms of a comparison, for example, I'm looking at the that now seems to be closed, but the Tulip Inn, how does the Tulip Inn help us in terms of the comparison with hotel space in a prime location in the DIFC?
So I didn't catch the what, sorry?
The Tulip Hotel here, it says, if you look on the
Tulip.
list. Yeah.
Okay. Which number is the
26,
Tulip?
Second list. Maybe that's a bad example. But look at 28, Nakura Dubai Barasha Heights Hotel Suites.
Yeah. So, you know, these are in completely different locations, attracting completely different target audiences. And what this doesn't show is what the ADR rates in these particular hotels are. So, you know, it's a bit like the office approach. If you bundle in the entire market, by default, you're going to have a lower rate than the prime, and you're going to have a higher rate than the below prime. And the effect of taking all these hotels means if you are looking at a prime location such as the DIFC, but applying the rates from this group of hotels, by default, you're going to be predicting a lower rate than the DIFC in terms of ADR and most certainly occupancy. Okay,
thank you. I just want to get clear on one thing. You referred to your Berkeley Square example. If you could look at the map, please, at E10 of your report.
Mm. Yeah, I'm there.
Yes. So, if you're able to, could you sort of tell us where Berkeley Square is? And I think the other waypoint you gave us was Holborn.
Yeah.
On this map.
So the analogy of Berkeley Square. Look, I appreciate you can't see it that clearly. Are we looking at figure 4 of?
Oh yeah, figure 4. Gate Avenue 2021.
Gate Avenue. So if you basically drew a line around the precinct, the gate village, the subject site, and around that, and then sort of included Fatan and part of the Ritz, that would be my Berkeley Square.
Right.
You know, Holborn is you know, behind Fatan, and it gets a lot worse when you get to sort of Park Towers and Index Tower and Central Park Towers, and that, you know, that's reflected in the rental rates that these developments are achieving.
Mm-hmm. And why, for example, is Central Park Towers not considered prime?
It's probably 1.1 kilometers away from my Berkeley Square. It's the development around it is significantly less than the development in my Berkeley. It's a big cluster. It's a highly developed area. It's densely developed. You know, it has a fantastic interconnecting sort of podium level of F&B and other facilities. Central Park Towers is an isolated development at the far end of the DIFC.
Okay, I'll shield my offence given the fact that I live in Victoria Park, East London, and that's probably Central Park Towers on your analogy. And move on to one last question. You were asked a number of questions about valuation methods and discounting. And why don't you discount when you're doing a straight loss of profits calculation?
Because that is exactly what it is. You know, it is a fairly linear calculation.
Mm-hmm. And you use the word committed as in terms of the claimant in this case. What does that term mean in practice? What's a committed investor in your view?
Well, the claimant, as I'm told, has expended over 125 million or in that order for the development rights of this site. Obviously, I don't know, but are they going to walk away having paid that amount of money? On top of that, they've paid for designs, they spent a lot of time and effort, and this is what I've seen through the witness statements and the various documentation, and it will be for the court to decide whether they are fully committed. But what I've seen at face value, they're absolutely committed. They're not going to walk. Well, it would appear that they're going to see this development through.
Have you had other cases, either arbitrations or assessments, where you had not applied discounting and simply done a straight loss of profits?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Williamson. Those are the questions in re-examination.
Thank you.
I've just got a couple of questions for you, Mr. Williamson, if I may.
Yes, your lord.
The first is why you have chosen, if you did choose, as opposed to being instructed, the dates that you have to carry out the exercises that you have carried out.
Those dates were given to me by King and Spalding. And
Right.
I believe that relates to a legal issue.
Yes, so you haven't applied your mind as to those
No,
dates
Lord.
at all. You've just taken those
No.
as instructed.
Those are my instructions, sir.
Right. Second question. When you are capitalizing an income stream for the purpose of assessing lost profits, why is it not appropriate to discount in relation to that?
In the case of a valuation, formal valuation, it would be. You would PV that capitalised lump sum back to the present value. In this particular scenario, as I explained, sir, what I've done is I've got to stabilisation, and then I've capitalised.
Understood. Yes, all right. Any questions arising out of that from either of the parties?
Not from me, my lord.
Nor me, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williamson, for your help.
Thank you, my lord.
You're free to go or stay and listen to Mr. Brand undergoing his cross-examination if you wish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
My lord, we're just arranging for Mr. Brand to be linked up. That may take a couple of minutes, but we'll do it as fast as we can.
Yes.
I'm happy for us to take a break now. It's 5 to 10. So if that's helpful.
Well, perhaps we'll just get through the formalities of the swearing in and verifying his reports and so on.
Understood.
My lord, I'm told we have a slight technical issue. I'm not sure what it is. I'm just trying to find out.
Where is Mr. Brand?
He's in the offices of Gibson Dunn. He's down the hallway, and Mr. Stewart is just going to see if he can find out exactly what the problem is. Ms. Camps is helping Mr. Brand get set up. So apologies.
Well, if there's going to be any significant delay, we'll suggest that Mr. Strange was right in his suggestion of a break.
I apologise. I simply don't know whether it'll be 2 minutes or 10 minutes.
Well, let's take 10 minutes now. All right, we'll take a 10-minute gap, which will enable that to be sorted out. Thank you.
Thank you, my lord.
All right. Can Mr. Brand be sworn in? Are you going to swear an oath or affirm, Mr. Brand?
I'll swear an oath.
Thank you. Have you got an appropriate holy book with you, a Bible or whatever your faith is?
I have indeed.
Thank you. All right, Mater, could you administer the oath, please?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Brand. Would you please state your full name?
Simon Howard Brand.
Please repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
to say the truth and nothing but the truth.
to say the truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Mr. Brand, I've already said to Mr. Williamson that that form of oath is not particularly appropriate for an expert, because what we're expecting you to do is to give us your professional, honest opinion, independently formed of the parties and so on. But you understand that and confirm that's what you will do.
Absolutely confirmed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Brand, can I just confirm, first of all, who is in the room with you at the moment?
Just your colleague to assist with the documentation and myself.
Ms. Camps is there, and you understand, don't you, that she's only there to help you find documents, not to help you with your questions. Good. And can you confirm whether you have any mobile devices, electronic devices, mobile phone, laptop, tablets?
I have no devices whatsoever other than a pen and paper.
And have you brought any notes with you?
No, it's a fresh, brand spanking new pad.
Understood. All right, thank you. Can you please pick up, or somebody pass to you, bundle E, the second section, please? And if you find tab 7.
I have it.
Do you see there a copy of your expert witness report?
I do.
And if you turn, please, to page 370 of that, do you see your signature?
Give me 1 second, please. I do.
Can you confirm that the contents of that report represent your true and complete professional opinion?
It does indeed.
Thank you. And if you go forward, please, to tab 16.
Yes.
Do you see there the joint statement of experts?
I do.
And if you go to, in particular, page 584, do you see there the column Mr. Brand?
Yes.
And can you confirm that those are your comments, the ones in that column? I don't think you need to read them all, but...
No, they are confirmed.
Thank you. And if you go to page 594, is that your signature at the bottom?
It is.
And again, can you confirm that the comments that you have provided in that statement are your true and complete professional opinion?
They are.
Thank you. There will be some questions, Mr. Brandt.
Thank you.
Please take up E370, which is the signature page of your report.
I have it in front of me.
The second bullet, I confirm that my report includes all facts which I regard as being relevant to the opinions which I have expressed, and that attention has been drawn in my report to any matter which would have affected the validity of those opinions. Isn't it right, Mr. Brand, that you've breached that duty?
No,
So is your evidence, and I want to be very clear about this, that there are no materials in this case that you haven't brought to the judge's attention that would affect your opinion?
there is no material that I have been made aware of that I have not brought to the attention of the court when writing my report.
Not good enough, Mr. Brand. You are supposed to be an independent expert, impartial, assisting this court. You can't close your eyes to relevant material. So take that caveat out and tell me, is the material that you have seen or are aware of that you haven't brought to the court's attention that would affect your opinions?
There is no material that I have been made materially aware of that I have not had consideration in when writing my report.
The lawyers only gave me X documents, excuse won't work here. Are you aware of this fact, that there were, prior to the termination of this agreement, 16 years of commercial relationship between the parties with respect to this project?
I'm aware of the relationship with regards to the JVA and the documentation that I've had with regards to this project. So I'm not aware of anything outside of those documents and the information that I've been provided with.
Now, I'm going to be very fair to you and make this very plain. A genuine, independent, impartial expert would say to his instructing solicitors, before I express views on things like efficiency and whether this should be a valuation or a loss of profits, I need to know where the parties got in their negotiations. That's correct, isn't it?
I've requested all of the relevant information with regards to the design, the JVA and the documentation, and I've relied upon what I have been provided with.
All right, well, let's hone in on efficiency. Do you think where you are reaching a gross to net of 70% on commercial aspects of this project, do you accept that where the developer and the master developer had got to on efficiency during their 6, 7, 8 years of consideration of that topic would be a relevant factor in your considerations of efficiency? Yes or no?
The relevant factor in this particular case is the ability to have an efficiency within the constraints of the planning constraints of the site. The project has not proceeded, and therefore I've been asked to provide my independent opinion as to the ability to develop that site within the constraints of the affection plan and the local regulator. So
you are the executive director, head of valuation and transaction advisory for the Middle East. Are you saying that the master developer, the DIFC's views, contemporaneous views on efficiency for this project are irrelevant?
I'm saying that my views are based upon the efficiencies of other buildings that have been constructed and are currently in occupation within Dubai, the Middle East and the locality.
So am I right to conclude you totally ignored the DIFC's own views as to efficiency on this project?
The views I am required to reflect are my personal views based upon my knowledge of the market. There are no formal planning consents in place. There are no formal plans or documentations that have been deposited with the relevant local authorities, and therefore this is a bare site, and I've had regard to my professional knowledge.
All right, so I'm going to take that as a yes. I, Simon Brand, totally ignore all of the DIFC's own work on this topic. Could you be shown F836, please? It's in the second volume of the F bundle. This is a document prepared by the DIFC's QSs. It's dated September 2007, and you'll see in that top box down the list, efficiency, residential 85%, commercial 75%. On the basis of that contemporaneous document, there is absolutely no fair, rational reason for you to adopt an efficiency of 70%, is there?
This document is a hypothetical document produced by QSs. I have had reference to buildings that have been physically built throughout my professional knowledge of Dubai. If you wish for me to go through and cite examples of the efficiencies of those buildings, some of which were built for the purposes of some of the most highly respected commercial operators for their own personal use, then I can give you those examples. But this is a hypothetical exercise until the project is built. And I've had regard to those projects that are already built and those that are in use within Dubai, so that I can provide my independent opinion to the court.
What you've done, Mr. Brandt, is deliberately shut your eyes to not hypothetical, but actual direct evidence on the efficiency issue because it suited your opinion. Now, are you aware that the DIFC and Hexagon jointly decided to terminate Perkins because they couldn't get to 80%? Are you aware of that fact?
I heard it discussed during Mr. Williamson's evidence. But again, might I point out that there are numerous examples across the whole of Dubai of buildings that have been originally targeted at such levels. There are no examples of mixed-use, high-profile buildings of high-rise towers that have managed to achieve it. And I've had reference to the market to reflect that. This is not a question of whether or not I have ignored a specific document. I have had reference to the physical evidence that is within the market as it is at the date of my report.
Don't you think, Mr. Brandt, where we're talking about a particular project and we have not one, not two, but three proposed design, and we have literally years and years of communications, negotiations, consultants and experts involved, that is material that you ought to consider when you come up with your parameters?
I can only refer you to the comment I gave earlier, that I've had reference to buildings that have actually been developed and built within Dubai.
Yes, and that says typically an office space will achieve a net to gross ratio of 75 to 80%. Correct?
Correct.
And here, contemporaneous evidence between the parties, 75% on commercial, 85% on residential. But yet you chose 70.
To reflect the nature of the FAR and the developability of the site and the size of the project.
So you know more than the master developer and the claimants who've spent years on this.
I've had to have regard to the evidence that I have and give my personal independent opinion, which I have duly done.
Okay. Do you accept that in hindsight, the document that I've just shown you at F836 is something that you should have made yourself familiar with and factored into your opinion?
No, because the project has not actually been built, and other projects that I have had regard to have been built and are clearly factually available data that I can deal with directly in terms of the market performance and the developability of sites.
Giving you a net to gross ratio of 75 to 80%, which is what you say in your report.
Which is what I say in my report as a general comment within the market.
Okay, so the evidence you rely on gives us a range of 75 to 80%. The contemporaneous evidence is somewhere between 75 and 80%. Mr. Williamson takes a very reasonable approach at 75%, but you chip in at 70%. how on earth does that make any sense other than you were trying to take nearly 200 million dirhams worth of value off this calculation?
It had no reference to the calculation and whether I was taking value off it. It was having regard to the nature of the site, the developability, and therefore the number of floors required to get to the proposed development at the date.
Were you aware that the two-tower approach had been abandoned and the parties were considering a single tower at the time that their relationship fell apart?
I would not be considering anything else other than a single tower on that site.
Okay, so all of the points that have been made about it being difficult to achieve an 80% efficiency with two towers would be irrelevant in your view?
There is very little opportunity within that site to meet the FAR requirements of the proposed development with more than one tower, simply because of the physical constraints of the site. If you were to try and build two towers on it, those towers would need to be of considerably more floors than the proposal of building one single tower.
Are you an engineer?
I'm a chartered surveyor.
So that means you're not an engineer.
Correct.
Are you an architect?
No.
Have you ever designed, either as a concept design or as the building designs, a tower block?
No.
Thank you. Now, are you aware of the level of commitment that Hexagon had made to this project?
The financial commitment, yes.
What about contractual commitments?
I'm aware of the documentation that's been provided with regards to the JVA.
Would you regard a party who has already invested north of $100 million is committed in writing and has the means to commit another $100 million, has spent 7 or 8 years already and has retained around 10 different consultants? Would you regard that investor as committed to the project and likely to proceed, all else being equal, in your experience?
I am not in a position to specifically comment as to the commitments of this particular developer, but there are numerous examples of developers that have invested significantly more money and walked away from projects within Dubai. And therefore, it is not purely a decision that I can take on the basis of a financial investment.
Mr. Brand, it's palpably obvious to me when you A, avoid the question, and B, answer it in a negative. Given all of your experience, do you accept that the developers who spend many millions of dollars and commit many amounts of time, if they still have the opportunity to pursue a project in a prime location in Dubai, all else being equal, they will proceed?
They will proceed as long as the project is feasible and returns a reasonable rate of return against the investment.
Thank you very much. Now, were you present for Mr. Williamson's evidence?
I was.
Just before I turn to Mr. Williamson's evidence, have you discussed with your colleagues at JLL the 2009 report they prepared?
I'm aware that there was a feasibility report done prior to my arrival in Dubai, but none of those staff still work for JLL, and therefore I would be in no position to discuss it.
Okay. Did you try?
Sorry?
Did you try?
I clearly undertook a conflict of interest check when we were appointed, and I spoke to the relevant department head, who confirmed to me that nobody that was privy to that report and undertook the work on it is currently employed, in most cases, within the region, and certainly not within JLL.
All right. Now, in that report, they adopted an efficiency of 80%, didn't they?
I can't comment on what was done then. I can comment, having read the report, that they followed instructions provided by the then party that was instructing them.
They were preparing a feasibility study, were they not?
They were preparing a feasibility study based on inputs provided by the client, not a highest and best use study.
When JLL provides to a client a feasibility study, they have obligations, don't they? The same obligations that you have under your various charters.
The feasibility study provided by JLL was not provided by any chartered surveyor. And more importantly, it was a financial feasibility to show the financial returns on a specific project provided by the then client.
Right. Do you accept that if JLL or any other company out there is negligent or makes a serious mistake in a feasibility study, they could get sued?
Anybody that is negligent in providing a service is left open to that.
Right. So JLL in 2009 certainly would have provided their skills, their opinion, their expertise in assessing the feasibility, wouldn't they?
They provided a feasibility study, which was a financial report based upon the parameters provided by the client, based on the report that I have seen.
And if they thought the client was crackers and had got it totally wrong and was heading for disaster and wouldn't make any money because some of their assumptions were wrong, they would have told them, wouldn't they?
The financial assessment will assess the inputs that are provided. The report clearly details the caveats and the basis upon which that financial feasibility was produced. And it was produced based on the information provided by the client, which included costs, proposed design, and other matters.
Are you telling me that if a client turned up and said, I want a 250-story tower with 98% efficiency on a mixed-use basis, JLL would just happily go and calculate the numbers and not say, we're sorry, based on our experience and our knowledge and expertise, these aren't realistic, you need to have a rethink?
The feasibility will provide a negative number for those sorts of projects, and therefore it will immediately identify to the client that it is not feasible. We were not, under normal circumstances, we would be asked to look at the highest and best use of some assessment as well as a feasibility. In this case, it was purely a feasibility study for the internal decision-making purpose of the client.
So you just said the feasibility will provide a negative number for these sorts of projects, and therefore it will immediately identify to the client that it's not feasible.
No, I said a feasibility study for a 290-story tower.
Let me finish the question, Mr. Brand. That's not what JLL said in 2009, is it? It's not feasible.
JLL provided a financial feasibility based on the assessments and details provided by the client. And the report is very clear on that.
It is indeed. And it's in sharp contrast to your report, which suggests this project is a white elephant and will never make any money. On that, Mr. Brandt, is it your evidence that this plot will never make money if it's developed?
That is not my evidence.
I'm asking, what is your evidence? Is this a dead duck plot, or can it make money one day if it's developed?
My evidence was specifically requested to give detail upon the projects at 2013 and 2018. Now, the project is not, whether in your definition, a dead duck. The question will be is whether or not a project is feasible on that site. And the answer is that a project will be feasible on that site, but it is a specific project. I've not been asked to consider alternative projects. I've been asked to provide my professional input and assistance for the court based on the HBU at the date in 2018 as provided by Deloitte and the consent in 2013, which I've duly done.
Tell me this, are you aware of the recent sale of plot 05 in the DIFC?
Yes.
And what was the price for that, if you can recall?
I don't have the price immediately available.
Was it around $80 million?
without having those details in front of me, it's not appropriate for me to confirm or deny that.
Well, can you remember whether it was $10 or $1 billion? Can you remember the range?
I can't remember the range off the top of my head. No, I see transactions every day of the week.
Okay, so if I rang JLL today as a prospective client and said, can I speak to the head of valuation? And I said, have there been any deals in the DIFC in the last couple of months relating to plots of land? You couldn't give me any idea of what the number would be.
Within a very short time frame, I'll be able to access the database, but I'm not in a position to do so now.
Okay. Now, on you said you were present for Mr. Williamson's evidence.
Correct.
Now, you heard what he had to say about your choice of the sample group of hotels.
I did.
It's right, isn't it, that your decision to include 200 hotels littered throughout Dubai is a prime example of you diluting value by including hotels that are simply not comparable to those within the prime areas of the DIFC?
No, that's completely incorrect. That is the data set from STR for the geographical location, and that's not the data set that we based our valuation of the hotel upon. We used the Dubai top hotel list, which includes a number of 4- and 5-star hotels in the downtown and associated area. The list that was referred to is a complete list of all those hotels that are referenced within the STR report.
You're more sophisticated than that, Mr. Brandt. You are being asked as an independent expert to assist the court to give honest expert opinion on something. Within that STR sample size, there is a subsample size of prime hotels located near this site. It would have been much more sensible, fair, and accurate. Let me finish the question. To only pick hotels that fell within that sample size.
Those are the hotels that we used for the valuation. The reason that the others were included was the total transparency for the benefit of the court. The 5 we used are in fact in that set.
Could you please take up Mr. Could you be given Mr. Williamson's report, please? And go to paragraph 5.47.
Yep.
Do you accept that those hotels that he has chosen are hotels that are either located close to or in the vicinity of the site, or of similar prestige and attract a similar type of clientele that those close
They would not be dissimilar.
Right. Do you therefore agree that that should be the subset that should be relied upon as a comparison?
And 1, 2 of those are included within the subset that we used, in addition to the Oberoi, the Mansell and the Palace, all of which are 5-star hotels within the prime centre of Dubai.
Yes, it's not those that I'm worried about, Mr. Brandt. It's all of the ones that don't fall into the description you just gave, which have lower ADRs and therefore dilute the number. Why did you include those?
We did not use them, as I've already explained. They were used for reference and for the information of the court because they are within the STR data set for the central Dubai location, and therefore it was being used to purely set the locality. We used the 5 most appropriate with detailed P&L STR data that we had to cross-reference it.
Now, where do you list that in your report? Where do we find that in Appendix Q? Take your time.
I will, thank you. There's appendix Q. It's not here, is it? Appendix Q is purely the complete data set.
That's rather my problem. You just told us you'd created a subset, but you don't tell us here.
Which we used for the valuation. None of that data includes the ADRs. That is purely a factual statement as to the availability of rooms within the STR data set. We used the premium STR data set for the purposes of our valuation to reflect the nature of the proposed asset.
Where would one divine that from reading your report?
It is within our valuation model.
Well, show us.
It's not within the report because some of that information is confidential.
I see. It's not very helpful for us, is it? If we can't look at the data that you say you've relied upon to come up with an important number, is it?
In terms of the information I've relied upon, it results in the reference to the graphical analysis that STR provided, which is available publicly, which shows that the levels of ADRs that we've reflected are reflective of the generic STR set for the upper scale Dubai market. The specific P&Ls of privately operated hotels are confidential, and those ADRs are my professional opinion in terms of the ADR adopted at the dates that are reflective of the data of which I have.
So you tell us, but we can't check.
Well, I'm required to provide my professional opinion to the court, and I've already sworn to state that I will provide a true and accurate statement.
Forgive me, Mr. Brand, if I don't have confidence in that statement at this moment in time. But in any event, are you familiar with RLB?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you the second page of their 2018 report. Do you agree that the data gathered by RLB is empirical?
It's generic within a range of the work that RLB and the other professional firms do within the market.
Is it empirical?
I don't have access to the precise data, so therefore I can only say that it's accepted to be within the range that the market would normally accept.
You just used the words, I don't have access to the precise data. That's a problem when we want to check things, isn't it?
I don't have access to the precise data from RLB.
And why is that a problem for you?
Because I can't cross-reference exactly where it's from, which is why I asked my professional colleagues within our P&DS team to provide estimates based on their experience of building high-rise, high-spec, mixed-use buildings in Dubai.
And you chose over about a page or two to summarize that, but gave us none of the source data, did you?
Sorry. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, you're complaining about not knowing or not seeing the data that RLB relies upon. You've done the same thing. You've prepared a summary page as an appendix to your report, but you haven't provided any of the source data.
I've requested the professional opinion of an appropriately qualified professional who undertakes significant work for two of the largest mixed-use, high-rise residential and commercial developments in Dubai, and therefore has access to that information and has provided it to me accordingly.
Who's the qualified professional?
Both of us.
No, who is, I want you to name this qualified professional that you relied upon.
Matthew. I would have to cross-reference the details back in the office, but he's another Fricks qualified quantity surveyor from our cost management team.
How many years experience does this Matthew have?
In excess of 10 years, and is currently now working for one of the most high-profile mixed-use developers as their senior cost manager on one of their major projects.
Did Matthew swear the expert witness declaration that we see of 442 of your report to your knowledge?
No, he provided the information to me within the constraints of understanding as a fellow professional what it was being provided for.
Did you ask him expressly to consider his obligations, in particular bullet number 2, and to confirm?
He was fully aware.
Let me finish the question, Mr. Brand. Did you ask him to confirm the second bullet of the expert declaration to you before he did his work and after he'd done his work?
I've made him fully aware. We discussed and it was agreed the basis upon which I was asking him to provide that work to me, and he confirmed to me that that was the case.
So we just have to take your word for it that you told Matthew, surname unknown, with 10 years experience, that this was going to be a key piece of evidence in a very important case, and that he would draw to the court's attention anything which may affect the validity of those opinions.
He would provide to me his point opinion, and I would then have regard to that when taking account of it within the cash flow that I was going to produce.
As you sit here today, you have absolutely no idea whether he disregarded data that may have adversely affected the opinion that you may now express, do you?
I have regard to considerable data that I personally have with regards to the single biggest mixed-use developer in Dubai and work that I undertook for their IPO, and therefore within the time constraints of this exercise, yes, I have personal data and personal access to the costs and the various specifications of those projects. So I am more than competent to review those numbers and to assure myself that they fit within the ranges that I have previously seen in actual contracts,
now,
construction contracts.
I wasn't asking about your expertise or knowledge. I was asking about the data that was gathered by your colleague that you then relied upon. So this is a separate topic.
Which
now,
I then reviewed.
Let me finish the question, Mr. Brand. That's how it works. I finish the question, you answer. Now, were you privy to all of the discussions he had in gathering this data set?
In terms of every single discussion he had, no, but I am privy to the actual data for a number of the projects that he would have used as examples.
So having not been privy to all of the discussions, you don't know whether he said, give me a fair, impartial range or answer on this particular point, or give me your lowest, or give me your highest. You simply don't know, do you?
What I've just said is that I cross-checked it against actual construction contracts for comparable, high-rise, high-specification, mixed-use developments within central Dubai that I have personal access to.
Okay. Well, have a look at this page too. You'll see there that RBL rely on the tender price index. Do we know if your colleague Matthew relied upon the tender price index?
He will have done, but he also relied upon actual contracts for the same projects that I've just referenced to you. The same projects that I will then have used to cross-check and ensure that I was comfortable with those figures.
So he would have done what we see in the next box, building costs, are based on actual project construction costs within each region.
No, he would have looked at Dubai-based, high-rise, high-specification, mixed-use towers.
Which is exactly what RLB do, right?
I can't specifically comment on the towers that RLB will have looked at, but I can specifically comment on the towers that I know that Matthew will have looked at, because I know the projects he's working on.
Mm-hmm. You see, what you should have done is provided, like RLB do, detail such as we see in those 6 boxes as to the nature of the data. The data should have been identified in some ways, and Matthew, who should have been identified, should have been a joint signatory to your report if you were going to rely upon such important data. That's how it normally should be done, isn't it, Mr. Brown?
As I've just said, the data that was provided to me was then cross-checked against actual signed commercial contracts with one of the largest, most high-profile mixed-use residential and commercial high-rise developers that I am in a position to have access to, and therefore I was comfortable that the bills of quantity that I had previously seen and the levels upon which that data was provided to me by an experienced, qualified quantity surveyor fell within the appropriate level.
So you used a sample size of one developer?
No.
Is this developer a client of yours?
No. Not always. On occasions, the clients of just about everybody in Dubai.
I see. Do you accept this as a proposition, Mr. Brandt? When you are doing a DCF, there are various levers that you can pull: discounts, efficiency, rental rates, that will have a material impact upon the ultimate number that you come to, positive or negative.
All inputs on a DCF will have an impact, some greater than others.
And do you agree that in this case, the 3 biggest impacts upon the ultimate number are the rental rates, efficiency, and construction costs?
With the exception of the absorption and the way in which the product is sold down. Yes.
Okay.
But those 2 additional points are important and are direct impacts on value.
All right. And when you say absorption, you mean absorption of available square footage in the market?
No, I mean the absorption of the product as it is completed and sold into the market in the case of residential, or leased into the market in the case of commercial space.
Okay. Could you take up paragraph 127 of your report, please?
Do you have a page reference for that, please?
E306.
Thank you. Yes.
You say there, Mr. Williamson assumed an annual take-up at 150,000 square foot, which I consider to be very optimistic and rather impossible to be achieved. Do you stand by that comment?
Yes.
Now, how does that comment stand in light of the DIFC's annual performance figures released this morning that indicate an additional 350,000 square foot of commercial space leased in 2021 compared to 200,000 in 2020, up 73%?
You're referencing the whole of DIFC, and I'm referencing a single building yet to be completed in a location which is not immediately within the existing DIFC. So you're looking at multiple buildings and multiple leases across the whole of DIFC against nearly 1 million square feet of standalone office space at 2013, and a mixed-use tower at 2018. Then we're not comparing like for like, I'm afraid.
Well, let's just unpack that for a moment. First of all, this would be a prime plot, prime area of the DIFC, correct?
It would be it's a central plot towards the centre of DIFC. It's not the most prime, but it is of a good nature.
Well, Mr. Visser disagrees with you. He describes it as prime. Do you disagree with Mr. Visser?
It's my assessment that the prime part of DIFC is already developed, and this is probably part of the best undeveloped portion of DIFC.
Well, I'm going to describe it in Mr. Visser's words. The project land is prime land in the DIFC, which has great potential. Do you disagree with that statement?
No, I go back to what I've just said. Of the available land, it is in probably the best location, but it is not part of the central DIFC. So in terms of available land, it is considered well placed.
All right. So if it's considered well placed, your point about DIFC in general doesn't really get us anywhere, because we can safely assume that prime land would be incorporated in that demand. Fair?
There is a finite demand for office space within the DIFC, and there is existing office space that revolves around occupancy and vacancies around the DIFC and other developments. This is not an in isolation consideration that this building alone could take well in excess of 50% of the generic annual lease up.
Well, you said we weren't comparing like for like. If the court, by way of example, were to take the 2018 approved scenario assumptions, 2022 would be the key point in time, and this particular project would fall right into the ideal target zone in terms of office space, because it would be coming online
if we're having regard to the 2018 projects, the office space is a very marginal portion of the whole building, and therefore the 150,000 a year becomes irrelevant.
So is it your evidence to the court, based on those figures released by the DIFC, that the outlook would be gloomy for the uptake of square footage on a prime development on plot 01 in 2022?
Are we talking about the current proposed developments, at the two dates upon which my report has been prefixed on, or are we talking about a new hypothetical development?
Let's break it down into stages and do both. Give me your answer to the first and then the second.
Well, the proposed project in 2018 has 20,000 net square feet of offices, and therefore is pretty much irrelevant to that conversation in terms of office space. The original project, which is 96% prefixed on the consent of 2013, is a very considerable standalone portion of office space, close on 1 million square feet, and will be in direct competition to Brookfield Place and other ongoing projects. And there is still a finite supply of demand within the marketplace, and that demand will be shared across the projects based upon expectations of quality, rental, and other incentives that the developers can offer.
So, cut to the chase, Mr. Brand. Do you say that the outlook for the whole development, not just the office space, would be gloomy?
No, the residential market is currently starting to pick up, and therefore, had the project been in the position to start selling off plan or to have products coming to the market within, I think you said 2022, 23, then there would be positives that could be reflected within the other use classes. Similarly, the hospitality market is picking up. And even with the additional supply that is coming to the market, my expectation is that looking forwards, those ADRs and therefore the performance of the market would also improve.
The information released this morning suggests that the DIFC continued to benefit for a strong appetite for its A-class centrally located premises. Would you agree that this plot is A-class centrally located in terms of all of the proposed development scenarios that you and Mr. Williamson have addressed?
I would agree with that, but again, I reference what I've said now on numerous occasions. There is a finite supply. We are seeing regularly tenants moving from one building to another within the DIFC for price points and current negotiating power to move into those new products and refurbished products. That is not new demand coming to the market. It is effectively cannibalization of the existing occupancy. And therefore, the suggestion that year on year, there could be a constant increase in occupancy and development within the DIFC without there being a certain portion of cannibalization and recirculation of existing tenants from older and secondary buildings is not a reasonable consideration.
Fine. Maybe you're right about cannibalization. Maybe you're right about not having substantial increases in demand. But that's really not what the debate is here. The debate is here that Mr. Williamson assumes an annual take-up of 50,000 square foot. You assume 70,000 square foot. The DIFC has just reported today that it was 350,000 in 2021. Do you accept that the statement you make at paragraph 127 is misguided? And would you like to withdraw it?
No, on both counts.
Thank you. My lord, that may be a convenient moment. And indeed, if I have a few, to take a short break, if I have a few moments with my colleagues, I may be able to shorten things further.
Sorry, my lord, you're on mute.
All right, so 10 minutes now. Is that what you need?
Yes, thank you. That would be helpful.
Mr. Brand, I suspect you know the rules, but because you're in the middle of giving evidence, you mustn't talk to anybody about the case or about your evidence. We'll take 10 minutes out now, please.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe two questions. I wasn't clear which exact hotels you used in your subset. Could you just give me those?
Certainly. The Oberoi, the Address downtown, the Mansell downtown, the Rove, and the Palace. Would you like me to have them formally sent over to you?
Well, as long as the transcriber's got the names, that may be good enough. But if we just look at the STR data, the long list, can you just point those out? I'm afraid I've lost the reference, but Mr. Montague-Smith can probably pick it up. It's appendix.
It's
Yes.
Q and it's page E561.
Thank you, Mr. Strange.
I believe the Oberoi Dubai is on page 561. It's entry 31. Is that the one?
Oberoi, right. That wasn't a name I was familiar with, but there we are. Yeah. And what were the other ones?
The
Address, which is on Mr. Williamson's as well.
That's 23, entry 23.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it also entry 15, perhaps? Did you say the Mansell downtown?
Mansell, yeah. 20. And then 46, the Rove.
I think you told me that Mr. Williamson had two of those on his list. Is that right?
He had the Address, and I thought he had the Oberoi, but maybe just refresh my memory on the other documents.
My lord, the reference is E41, paragraph 5.47.
Thank you.
You got E41. So that's it.
Yes. Oh, right.
My apologies. No, he's got the Fairmont. So it's the Address.
So the Ritz-Carlton, and I don't know whether the Emirates Towers is technically DIFC or not DIFC, but those are the only two that are actually DIFC as such. Is that right?
Correct.
Is the Emirates within DIFC or beyond the gate outside DIFC?
Well, for Mr. Williamson's evidence on it, if you look at the first sentence of the paragraph in his view.
Oh, yes. So it's the Ritz. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. And Mr. Strange is right, is he, when he says there's no reference in your report to that particular subset that you've used?
Yes, he's correct.
Right.
Your Lordship, within the report, there is reference to the top Dubai hotel set, which all of those hotels for the Central Business District are included in.
Where's the reference there?
It's referenced within the narrative, Your Lordship. There is no specific breakdown of the actual hospitality assets, but we have used the same top data set that Mr. Williamson's used. We've just used different assets because of access to data as part and parcel of the exercise that I undertook.
Which paragraph are you directing my attention to?
I will need to cross-check the exact section within our report, but there is reference within the hospitality portion.
All right. Well,
I can perhaps help.
Well, all right, if you've got it to hand, Mr. Montague-Smith, otherwise you can deal with it in closing if you need to. But
My lord, it's
I
E333.
think I might get to cross-examine you, Mr. Montague-Smith, but this continues in the current form.
If you want to know where the reference is, where it's referred to in the report, I can help with the reference, my lord. If you don't want me to help, then I can.
No, I'd like to see any reference that there is, please.
Yeah. So that there is reference to the STR set. I don't think I'm giving evidence of that. Paragraph 260 on page E333.
Correct.
Then actually 259, 260. So don't worry, I won't be trying to introduce any newspaper reports.
Yes, well, that was the other question that I wanted to see. I wanted to see the DIFC annual performance figures, which were apparently released this morning. Can someone make those available?
Yes, I'm
Mr.
sure we can
Strange.
reach agreement on how to package those up and get them to you, yes.
Well, yes, you must have them. You were referring to them, so you must have them somewhere.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And just remind me, Mr. Brand, in relation to the 2018 figures, what is the mixed use upon which both you and Mr. Williamson have worked?
On our highest and best use, which is slightly at variance between Mr. Williamson's with regards to the split on the residential element, we have approximately 66% residential. Let me just see if I can get to the section. If you give me 1 second, please, Your Lordship.
It's a long report and I've had difficulty finding my way around it, I confess.
If I'm allowed to help, my lord, I can point you in the direction of the
Well,
right sections.
I'm
Well, let's
confident there's a table somewhere.
So there are two, obviously, my lord. One is on page E343 for 2018. This is.
Yes, I'm interested in 2018 for the moment.
Yeah. So that then sends you back to paragraph 8.1, section 8.1. And the development brief you will see then at page 304, paragraph 114. That's the first one. How much? 351. 352, yeah. And then 2018 is the same as you know in each year, but the next one is page E351. It's the highest and best use project. And that sends you back to section 9.1 for the development brief, which you will find on page E321.
So you'll see, Your Lordship, there's a very small proportion of 2018 of offices. The substantial proportion is residential. There's a very small, even smaller portion effectively of retail. And then you have the hotel and the service departments.
Yes. I have no way of knowing how any variation in each of the matters upon which you were cross-examined affects your calculation. Do I? Is there any easy route to that?
Are you asking the differences between Mr. Williamson's numbers and my own, Your Lordship, or are you asking about the driving forces behind the values at 2018?
It's really the driving forces. I mean, I've got obviously your total figures and Mr. Williamson's total figures. But in the areas upon which you were cross-examined, what I can't have no real feel for at all is the impact they would have on your calculations if there was to be an adjustment of them. Which are the areas that could give rise to the greatest differences?
Your Lordship, that would be the residential portion,
yeah,
and the service departments.
Well, I follow that. I can see that from the percentages, but it's a little bit more complicated, I'm afraid, with the service departments. I've taken the view that the service departments would be sold into the market, which is why I've reflected the requirement for car parking. And then if they were to be reverted back into the hospitality operator, they would be done so within a pool, which is a separate matter. But what that means is that the cash flows are achieved at the end of year 2 in terms of the construction period, because they're sold off plan like the residential. But I do acknowledge that my costs are also higher than Mr. Williamson's, so I want to be totally transparent for your benefit on that. With regards to the residential, the big issue is our costs are higher, and our exit values, or my exit values, are slightly lower, but the absorption period and the off-plan sales reflects that in my opinion in a way that the market is more reflective to currently and over that time period. So the time frame is shorter, but obviously the issue regarding the cost of construction being higher reflects the fact that, in my opinion, the product would sell more quickly at the appropriate price point. So on the one hand, I've sort of erred on the side of benefiting the JV by selling out the service departments earlier, but on the other side, I've looked at the absorption and the ability to sell into the market on the resi, having regard to the price point of construction and exit. But they are the driving forces rather than just purely the elements of those. Without wanting to demean the other parts of the project, they are relatively de minimis within the 2018 calculations. Yes. All right. Thank you. Any questions arising out of my questions by either party?
My Lord, I don't have any questions arising, but I should just make one thing clear. Certainly in closing, we intend to present you with the two extremes and then some middle grounds that you could reach, because we think the numbers are relatively straightforward. So that's what we're intending to do. I don't think it's a proper matter of cross-examination of either of the witnesses, but I just wanted to flag that up before I said no questions.
Yes, well, as long as it's relatively straightforward, that's fine. But
my Lord, if it's me delivering it, I promise it will be.
Past experience suggests it isn't always as straightforward as that, particularly for someone who's not as well versed in these matters as chartered surveyors are. Anyway, there it is. All right. Nothing from you, Mr. Montague-Smith?
Nothing from me, my lord.
No, very good. All right. Where do we go from here? What do the parties want to do in terms of closings?
Well, could Mr. Brandt be excused?
I'm so sorry, Mr. Brandt. I should have said thank you very much for your help, and you're free to go. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Lordship.
My Lord, it wasn't a matter for cross-examination, but just on my learned friend's point and your query about, in effect, sensitivities. There is some material in the bundle on sensitivities and the effect of the change that various inputs would have. There's obviously the overarching question of discounting, and Mr. Brandt has provided a discounting analysis of Mr. Williamson's figures.
No,
So
I've got that.
And then Mr. Williamson has provided various sensitivity analyses at the end of his report, identifying the effect on his outcomes of plus or minus usually 15% of certain inputs. So you'll find that on page E209. So for example, if the residential sale rate goes down from his proposal by 15%, then Hexagon's share of the profits, according to him, comes down from 570 million to 394 million, that sort of thing. But there is obviously no way of providing you easily with some sort of detailed composite, because once you get past 3 or 4 variables, you end up with exponential numbers of outputs. But at least those might give.
That's always the problem the tribunal is faced with, because unless you know the conclusions that I reach on each subject, you can't give me a composite figure.
Yeah, I think this may be one of those cases where it all comes out in the wash, if I can put it like that. But we can make our submissions on that.
May come out on questions of general principle, but until one's decided that, one can't decide as to whether individual points of detail are going to make a real difference or not.
Yes, but all I was suggesting on that is that you may get a sense of how important individual points of detail are to the case that is being advanced by looking at Mr. Williamson's sensitivity analysis. Because, as I say, you will see, for example, the ADR for service departments. If that comes down by 15%, it knocks about, 90 million dirhams off the claim. You know, it gives you that sort of sense. It's page E209.
It's 210 that deals with service departments ADR, isn't it?
Yes, and so you've got stabilised occupancy, you've got hotel ADR, which is obviously quite significant as well. And over the page on 211, you've got his explanation of what the difference in the capitalisation rate, how that affects the outcome. And as you say, these things will have a compound effect if multiple of them are moved.
Upwards or downwards?
Well, these are from Mr. Williamson's figures, so they're not going to go up. That's the case. I think there is also, he hasn't put efficiency in there. He had given some evidence in relation to efficiency, though, and you heard his evidence yesterday about that. But that is also buried in the report. So we'll dig out his reference to that as well. He makes the point it's very sensitive to efficiency.
I'm going to reveal my ignorance here. The reference to cap rate means what?
That's the yield, the issue of yield.
The exit yield.
Correct.
Yes, sorry, yes. That's not an expression I picked up. Right. Okay.
Capitalisation, I think it means.
Yes, well, I rather assumed so, but that didn't help me as such. All right, okay. Well, I'll have a look at that and see if I can make some sense of it. Right. The question then arises as to future conduct of the matter and how you want to proceed. It's likely that you should work on the basis that I will have questions during your closings, so that it may take longer than you would otherwise expect, or you may already be used to my interruptions, whether helpful or otherwise.
Yes.
From our perspective, my lord, I think we would either like to start the closings on Monday or Tuesday. We're pretty relaxed about which of those it is, and would adopt your preference. Given what you said and the fact that there is a lot of material, if there's a possibility that we'll leak into a third day, even if it's only for an hour or two in the morning. If it's Tuesday or Wednesday, then we may just be alive to the fact that we'd need a bit of Thursday. If it's Monday, Tuesday, we may need a bit of Wednesday. But other than that, I think we're pretty relaxed as to when the court would like us to start. I think we'd be not keen to start tomorrow morning, but other than that.
No.
I think from our perspective, my lord, I think I'd been thinking in terms of Tuesday, just simply because you've asked for something in writing and there is a little bit of authority that you want us to assemble, obviously, for obvious reasons. So I'd been thinking in terms of Tuesday and Wednesday, if only selfishly to try and get half a day off, of which there have been few in the last month. But I mean, it's not a priority, and we can start on Monday if you prefer it.
Well, I would prefer Monday actually, but you've got a bit more time today than you might otherwise have expected, perhaps. If there's a problem about that, you can let me know. But let's work on the basis of Monday and Tuesday and try and get through it in those 2 days if we possibly can.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, as to authority, I mean, I don't think there is going to be much relevant authority, or such as there is stuff I'm probably familiar with.
Yes. I mean, my lord, you'd asked me to let you know of our direction of travel on the sort of agreement to agree principles.
Yeah.
And I think I can tell you, we certainly don't think we're in Walford and Miles territory. We're convinced this is a Petromech situation. You have a binding agreement. There are some things that have to be undertaken by both parties in terms of results to achieve a goal, and they're prescribed, and there's a best endeavours good faith obligation to pursue those. So we say there's clearly sufficient certainty for you to adjudge both parties' compliance. And we're helped here in that we have, a pretty detailed chronology of events now for the material times. So we won't be bombarding you with authorities on those principles, but that's where we're headed on that particular issue. And leaving that aside, I mean, I tend to agree. I think the law. I don't think either of us are going to bore you with the law on renunciation and affirmation to any great degree.
No, I mean, I think the question arises in the context of what you've just been saying about mixed use. That's probably the area that I've been reflecting on.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms of what agreement there was and what agreement there might have been.
Yes.
Starting from the AJVA and what appears in Schedule E. I think it's T, yes, what appears in Schedule E,
Yes.
which I think everybody recognises would certainly not have been highest and best use come either 2013 or 2018. And I think I can indicate this. I've already indicated it, I think. As I see it at present, it's 2018 that's relevant, but I don't quite see why the date that has been picked for 2018 is the right date. It may or may not make much difference, but there it is.
Well, on that issue of agreements to agree and so forth, I think where we will be making submissions would probably be the law is really the background to the construction of the term, and so it will inform the way in which you construe the term as to the scope of what could be the duties that could be imposed on parties in that context. But anyway, we can deal with that, and I agree. I don't think we'll be bombarding you with an awful lot of authority on that. But anyway, there we are.
All right.
My learned friend was going to give us an explanation of what those duties were said to be before we broke for closings, though. I seem to recall your lordship say you would require it at this stage, but perhaps you've reflected on that.
Well, I must confess, I thought my homework was the answer I just gave. Of course, if I misunderstood, I thought that was focused on the agreement to agree point, rather than the extent of a best endeavours and good faith obligation. But if I got that wrong,
well, there's a basic question you have to deal with at some point, which is, does best endeavours involve reaching an agreement that is inconsistent with the AJVA? That's the basic question that I want to put to you.
yes.
Right.
Yes, and our answer will be yes, particularly where the aspects of the AJVA that deal with commercial points are expressly set forth as capable of variation.
Well, I understand the point about what's in the AJVA that suggests there's possibility of future variation, but that requires agreement.
Yes.
But there are also questions as to what's outside that.
Yes.
And I want to know your cases on both those elements, the things that are envisaged as being possibly varied in the future by the express terms of the AJVA, and also those that are not catered for in that way.
Yes.
And does your case require the parties to reach agreement on both those matters?
It requires both parties to exercise best endeavours and good faith to get there, and the fact that circumstances may change in a market, and therefore the considerations as to what the commercial arrangement would be may change, doesn't extinguish or relieve a party from exercising best endeavours. And you may be familiar with some of the decisions where the parties have upheld as enforceable the party's obligation is to use best endeavours to secure a particular type of financing, and there's been changes in the market and the contract is still enforceable. And the real question is, and we say there is clearly sufficient certainty for you to adjudicate as to whether the parties were close or got there, or there was a basis upon which they could get there, and the failure to do so, whether that was down to a breach of an obligation of best endeavours or good faith with respect to a particular step along the way.
Right. Okay. Very good. All right. Well, we'll draw to a close there, and I'll see you on Monday.
My lord, in terms of speaking notes, sorry to interject, in terms of speaking notes, are you happy just to receive those shortly before the submission is made, so we can go through them with you, rather than something that's provided in advance? That's the only reason why. Issue on timing.
Well, I suppose we should have discussed the order in which submissions are going to be made.
I think that's agreed. I think my learned friend's going first. I'm going second. And then he asked you yesterday for a short response, which I don't object to, subject to anything new coming up. Yeah. But I think when we discussed speaking notes previously, Your Honour had indicated you were quite content for those to be provided effectively contemporaneously with your oral submissions.
Yes, but it would help to have it earlier. I appreciate that you may need to refine your submissions when you've heard what Mr. Sprange has to say. All I'm saying is the earlier the better, really.
Understood.
All right. Very good. Monday morning, afternoon to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Have a good week.